One winter morning, right before Christmas, I walked out of my son's house. No farewells. I was not seen off by anyone. They never begged me to remain, but they also never asked me to go. I have always saved every cent and every meal for my kids. I used to think that all it took to get their affection was sacrifice. However, I realized that I wasn't a mother to them after being asked a seemingly innocuous question. In a savings account, I was just a number. I departed and began living a new life that no one could have predicted. My narrative is this. I hope you'll pay attention. Lydia Bennett is my name. On the outskirts of Bozeman, Montana, I live alone in a little wooden cottage at the age of 69. It's a one-story house with a porch that creaks beneath my weight and fading white siding. But it's mine. This place is peaceful, especially now that Bill is dead. He suffered a stroke and slumped on the porch stairs that morning, 5 years ago. They said that he had left before the paramedics got there. I still occasionally find myself conversing with him, usually when I'm watering the tomatoes he planted in the backyard. It may be silly, but it's helpful. My days are easy. Around 5:30 a.m., when the sky is still scarred from the night, I awaken before the dawn. I water the garden, those tomatoes, the basil, and the obstinate lavender shrub that won't bloom, and sweep the back porch. After that, I make a small pot of coffee and read the paper while sitting outside on the front steps. The Bozeman Daily Chronicle continues to be a reliable source. God bless them. With the exception of birdsong and the occasional pickup vehicle, rumbling down the road, it's always silent that early. Fig, my cat, generally cuddles up next to me and purrs like a kettle. Since Bill's passing, he has stayed at my side. The week following the burial, I saw him sobbing behind the woodshed, and for some reason, we simply clung to one another. Many people ask me if I ever feel lonely. No, I tell them. I refer to it as selected solitude. There is a distinction. I appreciate that nobody will interrupt to ask what's for supper or to complain about the heat. I enjoy the silence. I would be dishonest, though, if I claimed to have never heard the sounds. My only kid is Liam. He currently resides in Spokane, which is 6 hours to the west if you go straight, and maybe 7 if you stop for coffee. He has 2 children, Jamie and Ava, with his wife Melissa. Good children. Occasionally, they send pictures and glittery Christmas cards that get caught in my carpet. Liam has a steady job with good perks as a warehouse manager. I really am proud of him. He doesn't visit often, but he's done well for himself. I can't recall the last time he gave me a nice, genuine embrace instead of one of those light, one-armed, "Hey, Mom," hugs. It may have happened before Bill's funeral. I keep my mouth shut about it. What's the point? He appears to be always occupied. Maybe once a month he texts more than he calls. "Hi, Mom, are you doing all right?" I constantly say, "Yes, my love, doing well." And I am, for the most part. Yet reading Love Liam has a hollow quality. He has no idea how financially successful I am. I didn't tell him. I earned a respectable pension of almost $3,000 per month after 30 years of employment as a bookkeeper at the plastics business. My nest egg is about $25,000 when you include the monies I've saved throughout the years. It's hardly a fortune, but it's more than enough for a lady who makes soup last 3 days and purchases with coupons. I informed Liam that my Social Security income is barely $1,000. Although I dislike lying, I refer to it as an altered truth. "You getting by okay, Mom?" he inquired casually, and that was the beginning. My first thought was, just enough to scrape by. He joked that one day he would sell the house and move in with them. The first warning sign was that. I was cautioned by my neighbor across the street, Walter. "You're retired now," he said while smoking that terrible cigar. "If your kids think you've got money, they'll either ask for it or start planning their lives around it." Back then, I dismissed it with a laugh, assuming he was being cynical. However, that statement stuck in my head. Every time Liam spoke, "You sure you're okay out there on your own?" It drifted back. I have faith in my son. I adore him. But clarity isn't necessarily a sign of affection. I've witnessed it far too often. Friends who gave up retirement funds to help with a down payment or co-signed loans for their children, only to wind up eating canned soup and splitting medicines to make ends meet. The children are simply unaware. It doesn't make them evil. I don't want us to be like that. A plea for money that I'm too proud to refuse and he's too needy to make tactfully shouldn't put our love to the test. Sometimes, especially during calm times, I question whether I'm being unjust. Perhaps I should have greater faith in him. Who can I trust if I can't trust my own child? I mutter to myself when I make a pot of stew or fold laundry. But then I think of Helen, who moved in with her daughter and became the family's unpaid chef and babysitter until she almost shattered her hip and had to beg for dignity, or Marlene, who gave her son $20,000 to start a business that never got off the ground. I have, therefore, kept things private. I have a plan. Every account and title still has my name. I never seek for help, I never borrow, and I pay my payments on time. That has power. Perhaps not the noisy type, but a quiet sovereignty that has grown more valuable than any Mother's Day flower or birthday call. But I still cook as if someone were coming over. Old routines. Like Bill used to enjoy, I cook beef stew and biscuits on certain nights. More out of instinct than hope, I placed out 2 bowls. I chat with him as the stew simmers and the house fills with the aroma of thyme and bay leaves. I remark, "You'd like this batch," and Fig meows as though he concurs. I have Bill's old cardigan in the closet. Even though it's moth-eaten and no longer smells like him, I still wrap it around me on chilly evenings. With a cup of chamomile in hand, I sit by the window and reflect on the years that flew by like a creek following the thaw. We laughed, despite our lack of wealth. Despite our arguments, we reconciled. It takes time to build that type of love, that solid, seasoned affection. More than any cash account, memories may bring solace. On other evenings, I gaze up at the stars while sitting on the porch until the air becomes blue with cold. I still think that family is important. I think that even if Liam doesn't call or come over, he still remembers the lullabies I sung to him, or how I patched his skinned knees because of the invisible ties that bind us together. However, believing isn't always sufficient. Furthermore, I was completely unaware that a single question he would ask me a few weeks later would reveal what I believed to be true about love, money, and motherhood. It was one of those hot July days when even the insects moved more slowly, and the air felt too heavy to breathe. I was pulling weeds out of the dry dirt while kneeling next to the green bean trellis in the backyard, when I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. I briefly believed it to be another shortcut taken by the mailman. Then I noticed it, a silver SUV making its way into the driveway while throwing up a dust cloud that was glowing golden in the sunlight. 2 little figures poured out of the rear door like beans from a can before the automobile had even completely stopped. Max, 6, already coated in excitement and cracker crumbs, and Ellie, 8, with her braided ponytail bouncing behind her. "Grandma! Grandma!" they shouted in unison. I dropped my gloves on the step, rinsed my hands quickly under the spigot by the porch, and opened my arms just in time to catch them both in a bundle of elbows, knees, and the sticky sweetness of childhood. My heart did that fluttering thing again, like an old bird remembering how to fly. Just hearing the word grandma roll off their tongues made the heat, the aching knees, even the silence of the past months, all of it melt into something soft. A few moments later, Liam and Melissa emerged. He walked a step ahead, holding the AITA diaper bag, though their kids were long past diapers. Melissa's lips curved upward in what might have been a smile, but her eyes darted quickly across the yard, the porch, the paint-chipped doorframe, as if assessing something. Liam said, "House looks the same," like he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. I didn't care. My son, my grandbabies under my roof, even if just for lunch, I would have swept a path with my hands if it meant keeping them here longer. In the kitchen, I moved like I hadn't moved in years. The stove groaned. The sink ran nonstop. The little oscillating fan in the corner wheezed and spun. I made beef stew with carrots just the way Melissa had once said she liked it, cold chicken salad with grapes and chopped celery because it was too hot for anything else, and peach cobbler, Ellie's favorite, if she still remembered. The oven turned the kitchen into a sauna, sweat trailing down my back and soaking the cotton hem of my blouse. But I didn't mind. Let them feel at home, I whispered to myself, ladling stew into the blue bowls I'd saved for special company. We sat around the old oak table by the window, the one Bill and I had bought secondhand our first winter here. The breeze pushed in through the screens, fluttering the napkins and making the butter curl soft. I watched Max mash his potatoes into a hill and Ellie recite the names of all the horses in her riding camp. I refilled their glasses with iced tea and let the sound of their chatter blur the years between now and the last time we were all together like this. Then, just as I was slicing a second piece of cobbler for Ellie, Liam set down his fork and asked, "So, Mom, how much do you get from Social Security these days?" His voice was casual, light even, like someone asking about the weather or whether I still grew cucumbers. I froze. My spoon hovered midair. It wasn't the question itself. It was the way he asked it, not with curiosity, but calculation. I felt the shift in the room like a thread snapping quietly inside my chest. I smiled. Reflex, habit, defense. "Oh, not much," I said. "A little over 1,000. Just enough for groceries and lights." Liam nodded, eyes lowering. Melissa didn't say a word, but I caught the glance she cast him, quick, sharp, then gone. And in that tiny gesture, something crystallized for me. The unease I had shoved aside when they drove up, the undercurrent I felt in Melissa's eyes, Liam's silence. It was all real, and it was sitting there now, thick between us and the peach. Cobbler. I changed the subject quickly, talked about how the tomatoes were finally ripening, how the squirrels had started stealing basil leaves again. I asked Liam about the warehouse, whether they were still understaffed. He answered in short sentences, barely lifting his eyes from his plate. Melissa chimed in now and then, polite, measured. The kids, thankfully, remained blissfully unaware, arguing over who got the bigger scoop of ice cream. But for me, something had shifted. The warm light I had imagined burning between us began to dim. I had convinced myself all these years that my love was enough to keep us close, that my silence, my sacrifices, my carefully constructed modesty, it would all translate into respect, into connection. And yet, here we were. And all I could feel was that I was being studied, like a piece of land someone's thinking of building on, but only if it's still worth the effort. I looked at Liam, really looked. Not the man he was now, but the boy he used to be. The one who used to run into my room at midnight after a nightmare, clutching his blanket like a cape. The one who used to sob into my lap when his goldfish died. That child was still somewhere in there. But so was this new version of him, harder, distracted, vaguely uncomfortable in my kitchen. Had I become irrelevant to him? Or worse, had I become a resource? I didn't say anything. I just kept smiling, kept pouring lemonade, and asking Ellie about her camp friends. But inside, something tender was unraveling, a quiet thread of doubt that I couldn't quite sew back into place. Maybe Walter had been right all along, or maybe it was too soon to tell. Either way, I knew this visit wasn't just a visit. And that question, so simple, so casually asked, had opened a door I wasn't sure how to close again. This winter had come down hard and early. By mid-November, the sidewalks in Bozeman were already slick with patches of ice, and the cold crept in through the seams of the windows, no matter how tightly I pulled the curtains. I had slipped twice that week, once while taking the trash out, the other just a few steps from the mailbox. Nothing serious, just bruises on the knees and a sore shoulder that ached worse at night. But it wasn't the pain that got to me. It was the feeling that I was starting to move slower than the world around me, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe it wouldn't hurt so much if there were more footsteps inside the house than just mine. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite, not for the turkey or the pie, but for the sounds, the clatter of dishes, Liam asking where I kept the cinnamon, Ellie's shrieking laugh echoing off the walls, Bill humming along to a country station while he basted the bird. 4 years. It was the one day that guaranteed everyone would be here. I woke at 5 a.m., sharp, just like always, pulled the old butterball from the freezer and set it in the sink. Peeled the butternut squash, sliced the cranberries, started the dough for cornbread stuffing. The recipe card Bill had written years ago still sat pinned on the fridge, his neat block letters faded at the corners. I ran my finger along it once, then got to work. It helped to stay busy. By mid-morning, the house was filled with smells I hadn't allowed to linger since last Thanksgiving. Roasted rosemary, melted butter, cinnamon, and cloves. The table was half set, the kids' plates with their cartoon turkeys already in place. I'd put a little drawing of a smiley face on Max's napkin like I always did. I'd even picked up a bottle of apple cider just in case Ellie didn't feel like drinking milk. Every 15 minutes, I glanced at my phone. Nothing. Not even a "be there soon." I told myself they were probably stuck in traffic. It was Thanksgiving, after all. Roads get jammed. I kept stirring the cranberry sauce, kept basting the turkey, kept peeking out the front window toward the gravel drive. Any minute now, I thought, they'll pull up in that silver SUV, the kids will tumble out like before, and everything will fall back into place. But the clock crept past noon, then 1, then 2. I tried calling. No answer. I left a message. "Hi, honey, just wondering if you're still coming. Everything's ready, no rush. Just let me know." Okay. I waited another hour, then sent a text instead. "If you're too busy to come, at least call. I just want to hear your voice today." Still nothing. 4:30. I walked out to dump the trash and caught a glimpse of Helen's house across the street. Her driveway was packed with cars. Through her kitchen window, I could see her daughter stirring something on the stove, 2 boys chasing each other around the dining room, and someone, I think her son-in-law, carving a turkey at the counter. It made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not jealousy exactly, but this longing. I'd always been happy for Helen, but today I envied the noise spilling from her walls. Back inside, I lit the candles on the table, poured a glass of red wine for myself, and another. I set it across from me in front of the empty chair, Bill's chair. I adjusted the placemat, smoothed the wrinkles out of the tablecloth, tucked a napkin beside the fork, as though someone might still sit there. I kept telling myself it was fine, that I understood. People get busy, plans change. But underneath, that calm exterior, my heart was curling up like a dry leaf. The food cooled, the mashed potatoes lost their steam, the turkey's skin went limp. I picked at a slice of breast meat, stared at the stuffing, then stopped. My fork hovered in the air, and I saw it so clearly. The image of Liam, years ago, sitting in that very spot, teasing Bill about how fast he ate. "You eat like a Marine?" "Dad," he used to joke, and Bill would laugh with his mouth full. There was no laughter tonight. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch. The wine tasted too bitter. The chair across from me stayed empty. I thought about calling again, but couldn't bring myself to hear the ring with no answer. So I did what I always did when the house felt too quiet. I lit the candle near Bill's photo on the shelf and sat by it. No lights, no TV, just me and the soft flicker of the flame. I held my glass in one hand, the stem cold between my fingers, and stared at the photo like it might speak. "Bill," I whispered. "No one came this year. I guess they're busy. Maybe next time." The candle burned lower. I stayed in that chair longer than I should have, long after the heat had left my bones. And for the first time in a long while, the stillness didn't feel peaceful. It felt like an echo chamber, one where every forgotten moment bounced back at me louder than before. 2 more days passed. No message, no missed calls, not even a forwarded meme from Melissa. On Saturday morning, I made coffee the way I always did. 2 scoops, a dash of cinnamon cream, stirred counterclockwise. I took it out to the porch and sat on the swing, watching the last leaves fall from the maple at the edge of the lawn. The quiet felt different now, not chosen, not sacred, just empty. I didn't feel angry, not quite, more like set aside, like an old coat hung at the back of a closet. You don't throw it out, but you don't reach for it either. And I began to wonder, was Thanksgiving just a missed dinner, or was it a sign of something larger, something slipping slow and silent between me and the people I loved? 2 weeks had passed since that quiet Thanksgiving, and the house still felt colder than usual, though I knew it wasn't the weather. I could have lit the fireplace or played the radio louder, but what I really longed for was the chaos of family, the sound of children's feet running across the floor, even Melissa's forced politeness. So one morning, just as the sky began to turn from black to gray, I packed my suitcase. I didn't tell Liam I was coming. I was afraid he'd say no. Or worse, hesitate. There's something about hesitation from your own child that cuts deeper than outright refusal. So I decided to surprise them. Maybe a little unwise for a woman my age, but sometimes when your heart is aching, you do things just to prove to yourself that you still matter. I filled a small basket with gifts. 2 jars of homemade strawberry jam, still warm from the last batch, a tin of butter cookies shaped like trees, and a few simple toys I thought the kids would like. I even bought a tiny wind-up train for Max, and a puzzle book for Ellie. I tucked them all in with extra care, imagining the looks on their faces. I didn't fly. I've always hated planes, too loud, too fast, too shiny. I don't trust places where everyone smiles too big and your knees touch strangers. So I took the bus, 8 hours through snow-laced roads and rest stops with bitter coffee and drafty bathrooms. I sat beside a young woman headed to Minneapolis to look for work. Her name was Jamie. She was polite, asked me about my knitting, and told me her mother had died years ago. Her dad drank too much. I didn't say much in return, just smiled and listened. But I felt oddly comforted by her presence. We were 2 women, trying to get somewhere better, even if for different reasons. By the time we pulled into the city, my back was screaming, every joint stiff from hours on the vinyl seat. But when I saw Ellie and Max running down the walkway toward the bus terminal, their arms stretched out, yelling, "Grandma!" it was all worth it. I dropped my bag, knelt down on the concrete, and held them both like I hadn't breathed properly in months. Melissa came out next. She looked surprised, almost caught off guard. "Oh, you didn't say you were coming," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I smiled, brushing it off. "I sent a message. Maybe you were busy and missed it." She gave a tight nod. "Come in. It's cold." They had a small house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with evenly spaced trees and too many recycling bins. Inside, it smelled faintly of lavender cleaning spray and something synthetic, like plastic and soy wax. I handed out the gifts to the kids. They squealed over the cookies. Ellie hugged the puzzle book like it was treasure. I told myself that was enough, that their joy would be mine too. Melissa led me to a small room next to the laundry closet. The air was damp and the heater didn't quite reach the corners, but there was a bed and a window, and I told her it was perfect. "I like a bit of chill," I said with a grin. "Good for the bones." That night, Liam didn't come home until after dark. Melissa had called ahead, said he was running late. When he finally walked in, he barely looked in my direction. "Hey, Mom," he mumbled, already kicking off his shoes and heading toward the stairs. I stood there in the kitchen, dish towel in hand, frozen. I hadn't seen him in months, and all I got was a nod. I reminded myself, he must be tired, work is hard, life is busy. But somewhere deep in my chest, something pulled tight, the same way it did years ago, the night of his college graduation. He had told me not to come, said it would be crowded, hard to find parking. And honestly, Mom, you won't know anyone there, but I went anyway. I sat in the back, clutching my purse, watching him walk across that stage with tears streaming down my face. I never told him I came. I didn't want to embarrass him, but I had never been prouder. The next few days, I kept myself busy. I cooked. Meals I thought he'd like. Meatloaf, just like when he was little. Creamy potato soup. Roasted carrots with garlic and thyme. I folded laundry, swept the back porch, helped Ellie with her homework. The house never felt like mine, but I tried to be useful. Still, every evening, Melissa brought home takeout. Liam would eat silently at the counter, scrolling through his phone. I tried to ask about his work, about how they were managing, but the answers were short, polite, empty. It wasn't that they were unkind. It was something worse. I was invisible. One evening, I made black bean stew with smoked ham, Liam's favorite when he was 7. I spent hours simmering it just right, even sprinkled a little fresh cilantro on top, the way Bill used to. I set the table with cloth napkins, lit a candle, tried to create something warm. Liam walked in, pulled out a salad from the fridge. Melissa followed with 2 sparkling waters and said, not unkindly, but not warmly either, "It smells great, Mom, but we're eating lighter these days, cleaner stuff." I nodded, smiling. "Of course, I understand." I gathered my bowl, brought it to the sink, and stood there washing the dishes while they ate their kale and tofu in the other room. I didn't cry, not out loud, but inside, something small folded, in on itself. It wasn't about the food. It was about what it meant to try and feed someone from your heart, only to realize they've lost the taste for what you have to give. The days blended into one another, like the slow drip of a faucet you've learned to ignore. I tried to stay useful. I told myself Liam must notice the little things. The breakfast, the laundry, the way I folded the kids' socks into neat pairs, like I used to when he was little. Maybe he just wasn't saying anything yet. Maybe he'd hug me before I left. Each morning I rose before everyone else. It's a habit that never left me, even after retirement. I'd brew a fresh pot of coffee, slice the sourdough I brought from home, toast it, and lay out a few homemade jams, apricot, strawberry, the kind Melissa once said reminded her of her grandmother. But the kitchen remained quiet. Liam passed through, with a travel mug, muttering, "We're used to Starbucks now, Mom." Melissa would glance up from her phone, offer a polite thanks, and rush to the garage without a bite. By 9 a.m., the house emptied. I tiptoed around like I was walking through someone else's home, not wanting to disturb a single thing. I turned the television on low, barely a whisper, just so I could hear a voice other than my own thoughts. Most days, I rewatched old reruns of cooking shows or weather reports, not because I cared about the forecast in Minnesota, but because the voices were friendly. I wiped down countertops that were already clean. I swept the floor twice. I folded, throw blankets that hadn't moved. It was strange, being in a house filled with people yet feeling lonelier than I did back in my cabin in Bozeman. At least there, I had the wind, the birds, and my garden to talk to. Nights were harder. The small guest room off the laundry area was colder than I let on. The hum of the dryer next door sometimes startled me awake. I'd lie in the dark and listen to the distant sounds of traffic from the freeway, a low, constant roar. Nothing like the still nights back home, where only the hoot of an owl or the shuffle of raccoons might stir you. I missed the sound of chickens clucking in the morning. I missed the creak of my back porch steps and the way Bill used to tap his knuckles against the cabinet door when he got up in the night for a glass of water. I even missed the way the floorboards groaned under my slippers. City living had its conveniences, sure. But for someone like me, who didn't belong to any routine here, it was a kind of exile. I was surrounded by speed and purpose, but I moved, too slowly for either. And then came the moment I had known, in some quiet place inside me, was bound to happen. One evening after dinner, takeout again, this time Thai food, Melissa set her glass down and said with a gentle smile, "So, this Saturday, we've got plans with some friends from work, kind of a weekend retreat up north, just a couples thing." She didn't look at me directly. Liam was busy peeling the label off his beer bottle. I nodded slowly. She added, "I bet you're starting to miss Bozeman, huh? Your plants, your little porch." My lips formed a smile before my heart could catch up. Yes, the orchids must be thirsty by now. And that was that. There was no anger in her voice, no accusation. But her words drew a clean line in the sand, as soft as sugar dust on a countertop. I was no longer part of the rhythm here. My visit had become a pause in their lives, one that now needed to end. That night, I packed my things quietly. I didn't cry. There's a dignity in knowing when to leave. I folded the kids' drawings and tucked them into my purse, smoothed the sheets on the narrow bed, and left the jar of jam on the kitchen counter with a note. For Ellie and Max, with all my love. Sometimes the most heartbreaking moments are not loud. They come dressed in polite sentences, spoken over dishes and half smiles. They don't shove you out the door. They just show you where it is and trust that you'll know how to walk through it. It was past midnight. The house was dark, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whoosh of a car on the road outside. Snow had begun to fall, brushing the window panes like whispers. I lay awake in the narrow bed, listening not to the world, but to the silence inside me, thick and ringing. Christmas was near. The lights were already up on the neighboring houses. Families were buying trees, baking cookies, preparing for warmth and togetherness. But in this house, the message had been clear. I was not part of those preparations. I was a guest with no expiration date, and that made everyone nervous. I told myself I'd leave tomorrow quietly, with grace, no drama. That's the kind of woman I am, the kind my mother raised me to be. But before I packed for the night, I decided to step down the hall and gently knock on Liam's door. I wasn't sure why. Perhaps a goodbye, perhaps a final attempt to connect. I only made it as far as the threshold. The door was slightly ajar. Voices inside, soft, serious. I froze. I should have turned away, I know better. But something held me there, a weight in my chest, a mother's instinct when something she built is shifting without her consent. I'm telling you, Melissa's voice clear. Her pension's way more than she says. You saw the statements. She's been sitting on over 200 grand. She told me it's just Social Security, barely 1,000. Liam said, quieter. I don't know. Melissa scoffed, almost with pity. She's lying. I mean, what is she even saving for? She's old. She lives alone. That money should be helping us, not gathering dust in some credit union account. Credit union account. I pressed my palm against the wall. My mouth opened slightly as if to breathe, but the air wouldn't come in. Melissa continued, her tone still measured but sharp-edged. She's just playing helpless. But if she really cared about us, about the kids, she'd offer support. Help us with the mortgage, maybe daycare. But instead, she brings jam. I felt the jam jars in my suitcase, nestled in a towel to keep from breaking. Then Liam spoke, his voice low, defeated. I don't know. Maybe she's always been like that. Private, stubborn, doesn't matter now. We just need to make sure she doesn't try to stay long again, Melissa responded quickly. Yeah, we'll say we're going on another trip next time. And honestly, with the kids getting older, we really need the space. There was no shout, no slammed door, just a simple unraveling of everything I believed about my son. My hand fell from the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't storm in. I turned around, walked back down the hallway, each step like treading water with stones in my shoes. In the tiny guest room, I sat on the bed. The heater clicked on, but the cold had already made its way into my bones. I sat there until morning without sleeping. My spine throbbed, but I felt nothing. Not pain, not anger, just a hollow that used to be full. At dawn, I slipped my coat on and zipped the bag shut. I scribbled a note on the back of a grocery receipt and left it on the kitchen table. Heading. Back to Bozeman. Thanks for letting me stay. The kids are lovely. I love them very much. No punctuation, no bitterness, just breath held in ink. I didn't knock on any doors. I didn't want to see their eyes. The bus station wasn't far. I paid. In cash, sat in the last row. The seat was cold against my back. I pulled my scarf tighter and clutched my old canvas bag, the one I'd carried since my first trip to Spokane over 30 years ago. Through the window, holiday lights blurred into smeared colors. Snow clung to the wipers. I watched people hurrying, along sidewalks with gift bags and grocery sacks. I watched a little girl help her grandmother into a taxi, tucking a scarf around her neck. My reflection looked back at me. Drawn, gray, unfamiliar. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel my back aching anymore. I didn't feel the cold. I just felt invisible. By the time the bus hit the highway, Spokane was behind us. Liam's voice still echoed in my head. Not angry, just indifferent. That's what hurt most of all. Indifference is a kind of abandonment no one warns you about. I opened my bag and reached for the peach jam. I ran my finger along the label. It had smeared a little, but the words were still legible. For Ellie. Love. Grandma. I didn't know if I'd ever get to hand it to her again, but I kept it anyway. The bus pulled into Bozeman just as the sun was rising behind the mountains, casting long blue shadows across the snowbanks. I stepped down onto the sidewalk, gripping, my warm canvas bag tighter than I meant to. My fingers ached from the cold, but I welcomed it. It reminded me I was still here, still capable of feeling. The walk to the house wasn't long, but it felt unfamiliar, like returning to a place I used to dream about, rather than a home I truly lived in. When I unlocked the door and pushed it open, a warm, faintly sweet smell drifted out. Wood dust, the citrus oil I used on the floorboards, greeting me like an old friend. The radiator clicked to life, humming steadily. The picture of Bill and me, taken during our 25th anniversary trip to Glacier National Park, still sat on the shelf near the TV. I set my bag down but didn't unpack. The suitcase could wait. Everything could wait. I stood in the center of the room, letting the quiet wrap around me. The orchid by the window had bloomed, soft purple petals stretching delicately toward the light. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't expected anything, really. But the sight brought something warm to the surface. Not joy, not yet, but something close to recognition. This house may not have spoken back, but it never asked me to prove I belonged. Without taking off my coat, I walked straight to the old wooden cabinet in my bedroom, pulled open the drawer, and reached for the slim blue folder tucked beneath layers of old tax records and warranty cards. Inside were the bank documents I'd kept for years, retirement accounts, savings bonds, small inheritances from cousins long gone, the final check from the plastics plant. I had watched these numbers grow over decades, not fast, but steadily, quietly, safely. I used to tell myself I saved for emergencies, for health scares, for Liam's needs if they ever became too great to ignore. I used to picture myself writing a check with trembling hands to help him through something truly dire. I wanted to be the kind of mother who could save the day without making a fuss. But today, as I stared at the statements, I saw something else. A woman who'd waited too long to realize that generosity is not owed, that love, real love, cannot be bought into existence with quiet sacrifices and jam jars. I sat down in Bill's old armchair. It creaked under me. My fingers traced the edge of the folder absently. I thought of Melissa's voice, so calm, so rational, speaking of me as if I were some hoarder, some miser guarding treasure for no good reason. I thought of Liam's silence, his indifference. And then I thought of every dinner I'd made that week, every dish gone untouched, every word I swallowed, every smile I faked. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the heat from the radiator slowly thaw something inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a detachment, like a cord that had been tugging at my heart finally snapped loose. Later that afternoon, I walked across the snowy lawn to Walter's house. He was sitting on his porch in two coats, smoking something that smelled faintly illegal. I sat beside him without a word. He handed me a thermos cap full of coffee. Neither of us spoke for a good 10 minutes. We just watched the light shift on the snow. Eventually, I said, "You were right, you know." Walter raised an eyebrow but didn't look at me. Takes a while to see clearly when your eyes are full of love. I thought I was protecting them, I said. He chuckled. Protecting who? From what? I didn't answer. I just looked at the sky. The clouds were low and heavy, pregnant with more snow. "You're still here," he finally said. "That's something." That night, after feeding the cat and turning off all the lights except for the small one over the kitchen sink, I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a leather-bound notebook I hadn't touched since Bill passed. The first few pages were full of his handwriting, grocery lists, plumbing diagrams, reminders to change the oil in the truck. I flipped past them carefully, then found the first clean page. With a pen that took 3 clicks to start flowing, I wrote, "From now on, live for myself. Health first, money second, the rest for people who've never made me feel small." My hands shook slightly as I wrote it, but I didn't stop. I underlined the last line. Then I closed the book and placed it next to the radio. That was where Bill used to keep it. I figured he wouldn't mind me borrowing the spot. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no cinematic swell of music in the background, no dramatic tear falling onto the page. Just a breath, a long, quiet, complete breath. I hadn't realized how shallowly I'd been breathing these last few weeks. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, though I hadn't set one. It had only been a week, but it felt like years since I last made coffee just for myself. No extra mugs, no waiting to hear little feet running down the hallway. Just me, the quiet, and the smell of fresh grounds. I turned on the radio, something I rarely did anymore. A country song filled the kitchen, old and twangy, the kind Bill used to hum along with while fixing the sink. This one was his favorite, I murmured, placing the mug down gently. But this time, the smile on my face didn't carry bitterness, just memory, gratitude maybe. Because at the end of it all, Our time together still felt like something worth keeping close. I stepped out onto the porch and drew a deep breath. The morning air was cold and clean, with that sharp crispness that only Montana mornings can deliver. I walked around the yard, picking up fallen branches from the windstorm a few nights ago, plucking a few withered greens from the garden beds. At least the plants still need me, I said aloud, crouching down to untangle a bit of frostbitten vine. They don't ask for anything in return. The peace I felt wasn't noisy or triumphant. It was simple, soft, the kind of peace that sneaks up on you after you've stopped trying to earn it. A week later, I biked into town, wrapped up in my thick green coat with a scarf pulled over my ears. I parked outside the hardware store and pushed open the door, the bell jingling above me. "Mrs. Lydia," the shop owner called out from behind the counter. "We all thought you'd moved away for good, went off to live with your family and all." I smiled as I placed a list of roofing supplies on the counter. "I gave it a try," I said lightly. "Turns out I breathe easier here." He didn't ask for more, and I didn't offer it. Some stories are too big to explain between shelves of duct tape and gardening gloves. But behind my smile was a woman who had just survived a quiet storm. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady on my feet. One morning at the end of February, just as the last of winter loosened its grip on Bozeman, I opened the old cedar chest beneath the stairs. I hadn't touched it in years. The hinges creaked like an old friend whispering secrets as I lifted the lid. Inside, everything was just as I remembered. A handkerchief embroidered with wildflowers, a bundle of letters Bill had written me during our early years, the family photo album already yellowing at the edges, and a thick packet held tight with a rubber band, the bank records, savings notes, and pension details totaling just over $25,000. I carried them all to the kitchen table. The morning sun filtered through the curtains and fell across the worn pages and faded photographs, casting a warm glow over decades of memories. I sat in silence, not with regret or sadness, but with a quiet sense of clarity. For the first time, I knew exactly what needed to be done. Later that afternoon, I walked 5 blocks to a small law office I'd passed 100 times but never entered. It smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. The receptionist smiled more warmly than anyone in my son's house had in months. I took a seat across from the attorney, a man younger than Liam but with the same cautious eyes, and began. The first page read, "I, Lydia Margaret Hill, residing in Bozeman, Montana, declare this to be my last will and testament. I am of sound mind and body." I outlined everything plainly. A portion would be set aside to cover funeral expenses. Another would go to the town's public library, the same one where I used to volunteer on Saturday mornings, helping shy children sound out their first words. The rest would be donated to a local senior assistance program, a fund to help women like me stay independent a little longer. I hadn't done it out of anger. In truth, I felt none, only understanding. Family, I'd learned, isn't defined by blood. It's shaped by presence, by compassion, by showing up, not by what you expect in return. When it came to the section about Liam, I read every word aloud to the lawyer, steady and slow. I leave no inheritance to my son, Liam Hill, not because I no longer love him, but because I have come to understand that anything love must be bought for is not truly love at all. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I took off my glasses, leaned back in the chair, and closed my eyes for a moment. I wasn't angry, just tired in a way that didn't ask to be soothed. Back home, I folded the will into an envelope and tucked it in the drawer beneath the wedding photo that had hung on the wall for 40 years. Next to it, I placed a more recent picture, one of me surrounded by kids from the library, all grinning with missing teeth and crooked pigtails. It looked right somehow to put them side by side, one a life I'd lived with devotion, the other a new kind of love I discovered late but earnestly. The following morning, after church, Helen walked beside me down the steps. I told her gently about the will. Her eyes widened behind her thick glasses. "You're not leaving anything to your son?" she asked softly. I smiled, not bitter, just knowing. "I am," I said. "I'm leaving him freedom." The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches above us. It didn't sting anymore. On the way home, I stopped by the corner cafe and ordered a latte, something I hadn't done since last fall. I took a seat at the small table by the window, the same one Bill and I used to sit at every first Saturday of the month. I didn't open my checkbook. I didn't check for messages. I simply sipped my coffee, feeling its bittersweet warmth settle into my chest like a memory I no longer needed to fix. And outside the window, the town carried on, slow, ordinary, unremarkable. But to me, that quiet moment felt like the first true breath I'd taken in years. Back at home, I sat by the window as the orange light of sunset washed over my kitchen walls. My old cat, Oliver, stretched lazily beside me, his purr like a soft motor running through the silence. My fingers moved slowly and deliberately as I leaned over and gave his ears a little scratch. I remarked, "I've lived long enough to understand," aloud, but not to anyone. "No one owes you happiness except yourself." I spoke with a calm honesty that I had at last come to terms with, without any sadness or resentment in my tone. Not immediately, but gradually, like spring creeping in even while the ground is still covered in frost, people in town started to notice a difference in me. I had changed from the lady who used to avoid looking at people with sympathy in the A's grocery store by keeping her eyes downcast. In order to breathe more deeply, I started walking more and taking longer routes. I gave everyone walking past a nod. I struck up discussions that I never would have otherwise. I enrolled in the senior meditation class at the community center, which was packed with individuals who were learning how to sit quietly and pay attention to their breath without letting the past consume them. The room had creaking flooring and too bright lighting. I struggled with it. My mind drifted and my knees hurt. However, I returned every Friday and Tuesday. I was also more visible in the library this time, not as a volunteer, but just as someone who wanted a peaceful space to read and reflect on her past self. Once more, the librarians recognized me by name. A young nurse from the county clinic came by to take my blood pressure one Thursday morning. She had a name tag that said Kelly and a braid halfway down her back. She was happy and friendly, and she was probably no older than 25. "I bet your kids visit a lot, huh?" she added with a smile as she put the cuff on my arm. I didn't recoil. I didn't provide justifications or well-practiced responses. I simply returned the smile, steady and polite. Simply put, "They don't," I said. "However, that's okay. It's sufficient that I have myself." She seemed uncertain about what to say, for a while, but then she nodded. I believe she knew more than she admitted. The snow had mostly melted 3 months into the new year. The branches in my backyard had started to show signs of fresh life, and the road to town was no longer slick. It was almost spring. Every morning I could sense it in the light, the soil, and even the slight decrease in joint pain. The phone suddenly rang. Liam was the one. Initially, his tone was milder than I recalled. He said, "Hi, Mom," in that cautious, kind voice he hadn't used in years. "I've been wanting to give you a call. It has been difficult." I kept quiet to give him time to collect himself. "The truth is, I've run into a little trouble with the project. The startup thing," he said after pausing. "Just enough runway is all we need to get through the upcoming quarter." Then I heard the words I had anticipated. "I was wondering if you might be able to help, just a loan, a small one, until we raise the next round." I released a breath I had been holding without realizing it. I twisted my fingers around the armrest a little. I said, "I'm sorry, Liam," with composure. "All of the savings have been given." I handed it to the children at the community center. "It is no longer there." I thought the line died for a second. Then his voice returned, loud and piercing. "What, are you serious now? It was money from our family. You let strangers have it." My voice remained low, but I sat up a bit. "Liam, that money was originally intended for you. However, it is no longer the case. You and your spouse made your values extremely apparent. When I remained with you, you never inquired about my food intake or if the blanket on that chilly floor was warm enough. The dinner I lovingly prepared was not even touched by you." I continued despite his attempt to stop me. "You believe that all I've saved is yours? That simply because I gave birth to you, I owe you?" Liam, you ought to consider how you would feel if your own kids behaved toward you in the same manner that you have against me. On the other end was a lengthy, empty interval of quiet. He hung up after that. For a while, I sat back and gazed at the television. I was met with the term disconnected, staring back. This time, I felt calm, like the silence after a protracted storm, without anger or tears. I checked my old messages, later that night, and scores of them that had formerly been the lifeblood of my lonely evenings were glowing on the screen. I apologize, Mom. Next week, I'll give a call. Can't talk now. Busy with the kids. Miss you. Promise will come by soon. As though bidding them farewell, I read them all, one by one. I then erased each thread one at a time. These unfulfilled ghosts of attachment were no longer necessary for me. I started assisting with the children's reading program at the community center the following week. I cleaned little noses, scrubbed floors, and read aloud from storybooks in goofy accents. One afternoon, Marcia, the coordinator of the facility, gave me a wide-eyed look. You spend hours standing up. How are you able to exert so much energy? Wiping my hands on my apron, I grinned. As long as I've got breath in me, I want to use it to love someone who doesn't hurt me for it. She did not respond, but she did nod. But her eyes did. I felt full for the first time in decades, not of food, pride, or praise, but of purpose. I pulled the wooden box, which I hadn't touched in years, from beneath the bed one chilly April morning. I set it down on the kitchen table and carefully unwrapped it. A few cards from Liam's early years, my first pair of eyeglasses, a pressed daisy from our anniversary, and an old picture of Bill were among the final relics of a life well lived. A light I lit next to it flickered softly gold over the grain of the wood. Bill, I said, I believe I've done okay. I have lost my anger. I'm simply sick of waiting for unresponsive people. After that night on the bus, I started a journal, which I picked up. With my hand shaking a little, I made one more entry as I turned the pages of sadness and clarity. No one else's love will ever seem true if you don't know how to love yourself first. I chose me today. I went to make tea after closing the book and putting it back in the drawer. Long shadows stretched over the porch as the sun rose behind the barren trees outside. Wearing my heavy jacket and carrying a hot cup, I went outside. The tenacious stray cat I had taken in, Oliver, sprang onto the seat and snuggled up next to me. I remained silent. I simply listened to the soft buzz of the earth awakening while I sat there. Then I noticed them, a vehicle entering the gravel driveway. Liam emerged first, his face drawn but softer than I recalled, his hair a tad longer. My two grandkids, wearing wool caps and scarlet cheeks, clambered out after him. They made a wave. I remained still. I hadn't yet grinned. I waited. Liam came slowly toward me, his eyes on mine, but they were filled with something else, something calmer, perhaps remorse, perhaps understanding, rather than entitlement or guilt. He said, "Hi, Mom," in a hushed voice. Keeping my tea in my hand, I nodded. Oliver stirred next to me, but I remained still. We were clinging to our former roles as mother and son. We were just two individuals rediscovering, or perhaps discovering for the first time, what love is. How did you feel about this tale? Has your youngster ever inquired about your bank account balance? Or did he inquire about your happiness, food quality, and level of warmth? Some moms save their entire lives because they love their kids, not because they are frugal. In order to give their kids a bit less hardship in the future, they save, cut costs, and live without. However, it's not being solicited for money that crushes their hearts. It's recognizing that love has been boiled down to a business deal. Lydia at last realized that the only person you owe is yourself. Additionally, love can occasionally originate from unexpected areas rather than via familial links. We appreciate your patience while we finish this narrative. Please feel free to remark if this mother's experience resonated with you in any way. Please subscribe to Forgotten Mothers if you want to read more tales like this one. Quiet, honest, and incredibly real. We are always here to honor those who the world far too frequently overlooks.